And we're
I
letting
don't.
people in. We're letting people in now, right?
Yeah.
We're letting
Yeah.
people in? Okay.
Yeah. So good luck, everyone.
Hi, Golly. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Just wait for a few more people to join. As my colleague Lauren has said in the chat, please feel free to introduce yourself via the chat box. And as we're listening to the conversation, or as you're listening to the conversation, feel free to use the hashtag Tapestry Series and Women in Dev maybe as well.
Woman in Dev.
Hi, Anando. Thanks for joining us. Oh, Roma, all the way from St. Kitts. We have a few Caribbean people.
Hey, Caribbean people.
And Gigi from the Netherlands. Thank you. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly.
Barcelona from Brazil.
Amazing. Oh, wow, we have people from all over. This is very exciting. Lillian from South Sudan. We love to see it.
You gotta love technology. You
I
have got
know.
to love technology.
We would never be able to, we would have never have thought to do this a few years ago, right? So
Nope.
this is very exciting.
No. Abby
Hi,
from
Michelle, Abby. Suriname, amazing.
Suriname, next door to Guyana.
So I think we can go ahead and get started, but again, feel free to continue introducing yourself as you join. And again, if you have any questions or as you're listening to the conversation, feel free to tweet using the hashtag Tapestry Series. Very excited to have you as well, Natalia. Hi everyone, welcome to the third installment of the Tapestry series. My name is Leanne Levas. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications at GOC, and we work, or Women in Dev is the hub for. And the Tapestry series is an event series that brings together individuals from networks, movements, coalitions, working from across various areas in the development sector. And so far, we've had some really engaging conversations around maternal health and climate change. And today we are talking about racial justice, equity, and inclusion, which is quite timely considering that here in the UK, it is Black History Month. So very excited to have this conversation with three amazing women. I think this topic is extremely important. It's really critical for us to remember that for those of us who are working in the sector, gender is not the only barrier that is faced. And oftentimes, Black and brown women who are often some of the most vulnerable to the issues that we discuss are also at the forefront of the movements and are doing some really amazing work. So this is an opportunity to shine the light on some of the amazing work that these three amazing women are doing, and discussing how racial justice, how important racial justice is, but also discussing the impact that racial discrimination can have when talking about the development sector, when talking about access to funding, when talking about just being on the ground. So we're really interested to hear about both the professional and personal experiences of everyone in the room. And I think the first thing to signpost is that we also, as part of the Tapestry series, we have Erica from ThinkLink. Say hi, Erica. She is an illustrator from ThinkLink, and what we're doing as part of this Tapestry series is we are creating a tapestry. So we're creating a visual map of the intersections between maternal health, climate change, racial justice, gender, feminist organizing, and feminist funding. And so at the end of this series, we'll have one large tapestry that speaks to the various intersections between all of these various fields and sectors and issues. And this is just so this conversation is one small part of that tapestry, and we'll be able to show, Erica will show a little bit about, or she'll show a visual of what we have at the end of this conversation. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Again, as I said, please feel free to use the hashtag Tapestry Series or Women in Dev when you are talking about the conversation online. And now I think we'll get straight to it. I want to thank Angela and Lena and Uma for joining me and joining us at Women in Dev in this conversation. And I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourselves because I will not do any of you justice. So Angela, if you would like to start off by introducing yourself, that would be great.
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, and maybe even good evening for some of you around the world. First of all, thank you for inviting me. My name is Angela Bruce Raeburn. I am a Trini. You know, those of the Caribbean people in the room, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, grew up in New York. And I work currently on, I started this business during the pandemic. It occurred to me that I had a voice coming from my background, you know, a Caribbean person, growing up in New York, wanted to work in international development. And I decided that I wanted to spend my time managing this idea of how you talk about race, how you talk about gender, and how Black women show up in the development sector. And during the pandemic, I decided to quit my job and try my hand at doing it on my own. And so I started Diverse Development. It's just a small one-woman show. But basically what I do is I advise international organizations, only international organizations, organizations working around the world, particularly in countries where, you know, white saviors go to help. And how do you show up in these countries to tell people how they should be developed, how they should, you know, see themselves. And so I started it last year, and that's it. That's all there is about me right now. Thank you for inviting me again. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Angela. Really looking forward to hearing from you about your organization and about DEI and what that actually looks like and how we come into these conversations in the right way, dependent on what our position is in the wider world. So thank you. And Lena, would you like to go next?
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me. I am a huge, huge fan of Angela and Uma, and I feel very privileged to be asked to speak with them on this panel. So I'm Lena Bheeroo. Who am I? I'm an anti-racism activist. I'm pretty awesome, I think. I am Mauritian Creole, and I currently work in international development in the UK as engagement and equity manager. And what that means is I am fortunate to work in an organization that has the power and the reach to engage with a lot of NGOs, INGOs in the UK. And through that, I lead the anti-racism work. I'm also part of Charity So White, which is a grassroots, award-winning now, grassroots movement campaign led by people of colour in the charity sector in the UK. And our aim is to root out racism in the charity sector, but also more than that, to get the charity sector to lead on that. Yeah, we can get into a lot more around that. And I have the pleasure of being involved in the working group on the Racial Equity Index, which we'll hear more about from Uma, which is an incredible initiative and really, really needed. So thinking about how can we change the system that we are in, recognizing our power, not just as individuals, but collectively, and pushing, demanding more of the system and more of those who hold positions of power.
Amazing, thank you. And already, I mean, I know that all three of you know each other really well, so I'm looking forward to hearing about kind of the overlap between the work that you do and the level of collaboration and solidarity that this issue is able to bring to the sector. So really looking forward to delving into that a little bit more shortly. And without further ado, Uma, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Leanne. And additionally, huge fans of Lena and Angela. I will say before I even introduce myself, it's rare that we get the opportunity to have spaces like this where we know we're going to have an honest discussion that is a supported discussion, because that does not always happen. Specifically on racial equity and all of the things that are happening in the global development sector. So my name is Uma, she, her pronouns. I'm going to, for those who, just to address any accessibility, I'm wearing a blue shirt. I have long black hair. I have clove earrings on, and I have very big bags under my eyes because I'm a sleep issue. I am a senior consultant with a Better Org, and I have the immense pleasure of working alongside my colleague Tina Janama to support organizations in literally being better in their approaches to DEI, racial equity, organizational strategy, and I love the work that I get to do with the Better Org. But additionally, given my experience as a former executive director within the women's rights movement and a community organizer, and the implications that come with white feminism, and the experiences and the somatic experiences that I had as an ED trying to fundraise alongside white women, this really led me to initiate the Racial Equity Index. And so I am also honored to organize alongside 10 other amazing Black, Indigenous, and people of color, along with our peer reviewers, to create the first ever index for racial equity in global development, which I will be sharing more on in a bit. I'm also a children's book author and love cooking. I'll stop there.
That was a great introduction. Thank you. And I think it's nice actually to hear some of the personal elements of what you do and who you are, because there's a real balance when you're working in this sector, right? Especially as women of color, as Black and brown women, you do need to you need to carve out those spaces for yourself to find peace and self-care. And so it's nice to hear that personal element. You brought to the fore kind of that all three of you work to advance or to make organizations better and to know better and to do better. So I'm going to ask each of you to literally talk about what that work looks like. Angela, if you want to start first, and then Lena and Uma, I know you have not PowerPoints, but some visuals to share with us as well. So I'll let each of you kind of delve into a little bit about how you do that, how you achieve the goal of making organizations do better as it relates to racial equity.
Sure. Yeah. Let me. I'm going to just speak about my experience and what I'm trying to accomplish. So, this idea of making organizations better. I mean, let's face it, it's hard to make organizations better, especially the way we live. We live in, most of us, in capitalist environments. We live in environments where racism is a part of the way we live every day. Our politics are entwined with racism and a racist system. So how do you make organizations better when that's the system that you're working in? And I can say to you unequivocally that it's not easy. And sometimes you make such incremental change. Sometimes you make just a little bit of change. And, and people say, well, that's not good enough. But when you think about the enormous challenges that we're facing, sometimes you have to think, incremental change is better than no change. And finding a balance where that doesn't drive you crazy is not easy, right? So I don't know that the organizations that I'm trying to work with are ultimately going to be better. Let me be honest. Let me tell you why. The fact is, after the murder of George Floyd in the US in 2020, there was a lot of conversations around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every big organization, every international organization, slapped on their websites, DEI, we care about George Floyd, we stand with against racism. But you all know that's rhetoric, right? And that when it has to be translated into action, that's where the rubber really meets the road. And oftentimes, it doesn't happen. So what you end up with is sort of this performative things. They're going to hire a DEI consultant. You're going to do all these sort of things that in theory should get us to a better place, but often it does not. And the reason why it doesn't is because we have to examine a really important part of all of this conversation, which is we are talking about making change in a system inextricably tied to racism, capitalism, and these systems are self-perpetuating, right? So it's not as though people with power are literally saying, sure, let's give up some of that power. No, oftentimes there's this whole sort of plan to maintain the status quo while at the same time allowing these sort of DEI conversations, dismantling racism conversations. So then how do we make change actually? Well, the people that come to the table in this conversation also have to be real about what they're trying to accomplish. So when you're talking to an organization like, say, the big ones, you all know them, right? These big international organizations that work in these countries, and you come in as a DEI person or as a person wanting to talk about racial justice, if you yourself, you're worried about your role, you're worried about whether or not they're going to fire you, you're worried about how you yourself are going to show up. If that's your worry, you can't do this work. So at some level, you have to be prepared to lose. And that's a mind space that many of us are not there, where we are prepared to say what needs to be said. And I recognize sometimes the privilege I have of being able to go into the room, say what I think that needs to be said and keep it moving. And oftentimes, many of us, especially the people at the forefront, and that's Black and brown women, let's be honest, right? We are often the women at the forefront of this conversation. So I just feel that this idea of making organizations better is sort of a tiny piece of the larger problem, which is how do we make our politics better? How do we make these internal struggles that all of us are facing in these countries, in these developed countries that we live in, right? When you look at a country like the UK, a country that's literally imploding, right? How are we going to work in a country like in the UK, and not to say that the US is not, because let's be real, right? The US is what it is. But I'm saying that the work of making organizations better is not divorced from the work of how we show up in our own countries. What is your politics? When you are looking at, and I'll stop after this, when you're a person who worked in development, or you want to work at the forefront of this conversation, but you will go back home and vote for a politician who literally vilifies immigrants in the country that we're talking about, how do you think that person with that politics can show up in an organization? How are they going to make their organization better when their politics itself is anti-immigrant, anti-Black, anti-women? And so I think part of our big problem in this work is we go to this work divorced from our realities in the countries in which we work. And I think that to do this better, we have to show up differently. And I don't know how prepared some of us may be for that. And I'll stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. That's actually quite a lot to think about. And as you said, how do we go beyond not just encouraging others to do better, but making sure that we're showing up in a way that's reflective of how others should be And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Lena, if you'd like to go next.
Ay. Every time we speak, Angela, it resonates so much with me. I'm like, oh God, am I just speaking to myself? So I'm going to tell you how I'm changing organizations. No, how I'm attempting to, right? I have very clear fire inside of me, which definitely comes from my mum and my dad. Like, it comes from my family's history and everything that they've been through and continue to go through, and my own experiences, and seeing and finding my own community of Black and brown people who feel the same and have experienced the same, and also just at the heart of it, knowing it's not right. So, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I work at a Bond, and I do recognize the power of the network of Bond, which is the network for NGOs in the UK, to start to use our reach, use our privilege and our platform to bring together those who hold positions of power. So the work that I have been doing for the last year and a half has been with CEOs of our NGOs and board members. And it's really about taking them on a program of getting past the tick boxes of the list, generic list of changing your policies that came out after the murder of George Floyd, of, oh, if you don't want to be if you don't want to seem racist, then you do 1, 2, 3, make sure you have a policy, tick the box, and then you're fine, you're good to go. Or hire a Black person into your senior management. Like, going further than that, my ultimate goal of all of the work that I do is to make this everyone's problem, because it is everyone's problem. Everyone is harmed by white supremacy in the system that we work in, whether they know it or not. And I can only speak from my perspective and with those that I work with. So my goal is to make it everyone's problem, and why not start with those who hold the positions of power at the top. So I've been working with them on a program for a year and a half, which is all about making the work around racism and inclusion and equity more personal to them, taking it out of the professional and connecting it to the person, because it has to be personal and professional. If we keep it in the professional zone, we get those tick boxes, and from the outside an organization looks fantastic, but we need to go further and we need to do the deeper work. And it can't just be that this is all on the shoulders of Black and brown people and women, as it usually is. There is responsibility to be shared around this. There is burden to be shared around this. And a lot of people are tired, so someone else needs to start picking this up, and it's right and proper for leaders of organizations to start to get involved in a meaningful way. So we're doing a program of building anti-racist practice, really thinks about and goes into the deep dive of where this system came from that we are in, the history of the sector, why it's so pertinent, obviously, to the communities that we work with around the world, if we think that's the right role for us, and how you can start to look at your own self, recognize your own privilege, your own power, and then get to a point where you decide that you can change the way you're doing things. Because honestly, NGOs do have power. Yes, we are always going to be, always going to be beholden to donors, as long as we keep looking and seeking that funding, and until that area starts to change and open up and become less restrictive, we are always going to be dancing to their tune. But there is power for organizations to change. The leaders can start to change. You don't have to do things the same way they've always been done just because they've always been done that way. And so it's really, how do you get people to a place where they know it's okay to start to change and not have all the answers? We don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I don't need the answers to know that what I see is wrong. And that's enough for me to spur and want to start to change things and look at things in a different way. And so all of the work that I've been doing was with about, I think it was 30 CEOs that we had across the sector of various different sized organizations, really thinking about these things, looking at intersectionality, not being scared of looking at other identity markers, having those conversations about whataboutism, when we start to talk about race, looking at the intersections, but not going off another tangent and just looking at class. It's really important that we start from where we are, and it will start with the issues that we're scared to talk about, because too often it feels like something like gender equality is something that everyone can get on board with, and race is in a corner in the shadows because people can't can't engage with that because it doesn't affect them. But you know what, it affects too many people. And we are the people who are speaking about it on this platform, but there are so many people who have been speaking about it. So many people from across Latin America, Africa, India, Asia, like everywhere have been speaking about it, but have we been hearing them? And we have this platform to be able to start to open that conversation up and to keep it on the agenda. This is exhausting, but my mission is also through all of my activism to try and keep this on the agenda, because it's been really sad to see how it's been deprioritized. And you know, there's wave after wave after wave of challenges that are coming to the sector at the moment. I really am mindful of what Angela said about incremental victories, because I certainly find myself on that constant balancing act of change is not happening fast enough, but also there's a little bit of change, so that's a good thing. But also, when is it going to be more? I'm like, and I know that I'm not the only one who's like that, because it's so tiring. But I fully appreciate, and every time, you know, when we spoke earlier in the week, Angela, you talked about how these conversations are actually happening in the mainstream now. And you can say decolonization, you can say racism, you can actually say those words and not be shut down. And I need to, in the system that we have at the moment, we don't have the space to breathe, to stop and think about what small victories there might have been, because the system and everything that we see coming at us just doesn't stop. It doesn't let up. And so that again is really, really tiring. But I digress. The work that I'm doing is to engage with senior managers and to share everything that we're learning, because there are lots of excuses of organizations to say, I don't know where to start. Show me where to start. I want to be inclusive. How do I do that? Just give me the map and I will do it. But that's not how it works. It's not a one size fits all. But the work that I'm doing allows us to be able to share some of the learnings that we found. So what have these 30 CEOs come up against? What have the challenges been? What are they learning? What have they failed at? Why did they fail? Did they try and overcome it? Let's be honest. Let's open up these spaces, and let's hopefully take away the excuses from organizations to stop saying they don't know where to start when we start to share all of this stuff in a wider way, and not just with the NGO sector, but with philanthropy, with governments. Like, anyone who wants to listen can hear about the work that I'm doing. And just before I stop, I also have been, alongside my activism work, convening people of color across the international development sector as well. And for the last 2 years, because those are the people who I kind of engaged with after the murder of George Floyd, to be like, what do we want? And how do we want to show that this issue and how we're going to get out of this, I hope, or address racism at every single level, is not just a one size fits all. It's not just a HR problem. It's not just a CEO problem. It's an everyone problem. And so I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. This is a very first quick look at a framework which has been created with Black and brown people across the sector to really think about the cross-cutting nature of this. Actually, everything about the system that we are in is racist. And so we need to recognize it's not just one thing. Wherever you start, if you're in comms, if you're in business models, if you're in policy, you can start from where you are to start to change things and start to change the way you do things. And it's taken inspiration, obviously, because this is an ecosystem, and nature, the system that we're in at the moment, is toxic. But we also have power, all of us individually and collectively, to change things. So why are we not doing that? And so this framework is going to be launched, I guess, in the next month, I think. But it's been a lot of sweat, a lot of tears, a lot of input and direct lived experience of people sharing their experiences and inputting into this framework. So I just wanted to share that with you as well. And again, the ultimate aim is, this is everyone's problem, so everyone needs to do something about it.
Thank you, Lena. I think that gave us a lot to think about, especially when it comes to making sure that all voices are represented, and that we're addressing the various intersections. I think that's incredibly important, and hopefully we'll get into talk a little bit about what that actually looks like when forming kind of coalitions and movements and so on. And Umo, thank you. If you want to go ahead.
Great, thank you, Leanne. It's always speaking after amazing women that I admire is always a a bit of a challenge. But I'm going to be sharing some slides because for one main reason, because the work that has gone into the Racial Equity Index is by 11 of us as volunteers. There's an enormous amount of sweat equity that has been involved in creating what I'm going to be sharing today. And so in order to do everybody in our collective justice, I'm going to be sharing slides and taking you through where we are and what we have done and where we're headed. And apologies for the automatic kind of ding of my calendar. After that, I'm going to take it a little bit deeper. So I'm going to talk about things broadly, and then I'm going to go a little bit deeper with things. That's the theme for this little snippet of a presentation. So bear with me while I make sure I don't share my entire desktop and just one thing here. All right, I think we're good. So the Racial Equity Index is a collective that's been around since July 2020. And you will notice a theme between what Angela has said and Lena has said. A lot of the work that we see happening within the development space, within the international development space on DEI. I'm not going to use the word racial equity because it's been so surface level that we can't even call it racial equity or anti-racism, really was kicked off because of the murder of George Floyd, and because international organizations began being publicly called out for the racial violence that was being upheld by their leadership, note white leadership, in their organizations. And so because of my own personal experiences and the violence that I experienced as an executive director of a global women's rights movement, I put a call out on LinkedIn and Twitter in July of that year, asking if anyone wanted to join to build the first ever index for racial equity. And when I say index, think about, for example, a gender equality index, right? That shares rankings and measures based on a specific set of indicators on how countries or even organizations are doing on gender equity. And so this is what I was thinking about in terms of racial equity. Why? Because there is no data on racial equity in global development. We don't have data. And I will say this, when we don't have data on things, right? Because how do I say this? White supremacy likes to measure things. So when white supremacy doesn't measure things, it's an indication of what they actually care about. Okay, so we don't have data on racial equity in global development. There's a reason for that. It's because organizations can continue to hide the level and the enormity of violence that goes on internally without having to be accountable to funders or anybody, right? So this is why data is so critical. So who are we? We are a group, as I said, of 11 people, including myself. We are our collective members, are Indonesia, Mexico, the US, the UK, EU. Our peer reviewers are from South Africa, Colombia, the US. Angela is our former peer reviewer, now joining our advisory board. That we will be launching soon. And Lena is one of our collective members. But our mission is to build a racial equity index to hold the global development system and sector accountable. And that's a key word here, accountability, because that matters in this, in dismantling all forms of systemic racism. I want to give a shout out to the humans and the Black women and the women of color that are part of our collective that show up while continuing on a daily basis to experience racial violence in their own work and organizations, to then come to our collective meetings on a daily and weekly basis to build this thing as volunteers, right? So these are our humans. They're wonderful, wonderful people. And so I'm really grateful that I get to organize alongside them. And then shout out to our peer reviewers as well, Fernando, David, Kirti, Masana, and Anjali, and our advisory board, which is coming soon. So here's our work. This is the journey that we have been on. We started, which some of you may have taken who are on this call, with the global mapping survey. That was 2020, 2021, right? That global mapping survey asked a few basic questions. The first was rate these 11 indicators that we had created along with definitions on what racial equity means to you in global development. So when you think of racial equity, what do you think about? Like, where does it live within an organization? What matters to you? The other two questions that we asked, along with demographic questions, was, have you ever experienced racism in global development? Have you ever witnessed it? And for people, if they've felt inclined to do so, to submit their experiences anonymously. We then had that, by the way, survey translated to 10 languages. Again, all is volunteers, no funding. I'm saying this with a, like, there's some expletives behind that smile to the funders, okay? So we translated this into 10 languages and we got responses from over 80 countries. This global mapping survey is the foundation for all of the work that we are now doing. It informs every single piece of what you have seen come out from us and what continues to be produced as a result. It took us a year to fully analyze the quantitative and qualitative data from this global mapping survey. And it has now led us to building the index skeleton and testing. So I'm going to take you through what that actually means, because this tool, I will be very clear, is not for HR. It's not for SMT, senior managers and organizations. It's not for executive. It's for BIPOC people in organizations. So we can actually know what is happening behind closed doors in organizations and have actual transparent and measurable and trackable data on racial equity within the global development sector, right? So this is not a survey that's going out to one person in an organization. We want every single person in the organization and the sector to take this survey annually. So here it is, and I know this is a lot of information. We, based on our research, have 11 indicators of racial equity. These indicators allow us to explore racial equity, or in a very major way, racial inequity within organizations broadly, right? So we cover everything from leadership to compensation, to salary, to programming, to workplace culture, to external partnerships and relationships, communication, sources of funding. So we really are looking at the broadness of an organization, how racial equity shows up within each of those indicators. Then, and I know I'm flying through this, I'll post a link in the chat when I'm done, so you can follow our work. Then within each of those indicators, again, based on that research that took us a year and a half, we have subcodes. So now we're able to not only talk about racial equity in its broadness, we're now able to look at the depth. Remember the broadness and the depth theme that I'm going for here? So we are now able to look at the depth of how racial equity is embedded or not embedded within each of those indicators. So for example, with workplace culture, we have these subcodes: racial abuse, prioritizing white voices, gaslighting, and tokenism. So how much or little racial abuse is there that contributes to a workplace culture that is safe and promotes an environment of racial equity or not? And the same with prioritizing white voices and gaslighting and tokenism. So the subcodes allow us to explore that depth and environment of racial inequity or equity within an organization. So again, that's our work. Where we are in this is we have spent now 2 years really building in the community piece. Again, as volunteers, if you haven't seen this, it's not because we haven't tried, it's because we have no funding and very minimal funding, right? So we've tried to insert ourselves into as many conversations to get the word out to people, to let them know that, you know, this is coming and we are building it. But where we are headed now is really now pushing this out into the sector. So we hope to launch the index Q1 or Q2 of next year. Please be advised, though, that that will probably change because this is off of the sweat equity of BIPOC women. And we are very empathetic and very human driven in our work. So if we have to slow down, we will slow down. And this launch will be delayed because we are not going to kill ourselves to hold this sector accountable. That's just not going to happen. But that is where we are headed. So here's what I want to talk about. And why if you sense that I'm a little agitated, I am, because it always, every time I present for the Racial Equity Index and I get to share our work, it really pisses me off because this is our reality, right? This is our financial report from our annual report that we just released, I think at the beginning of this month or the end of last month, right? 61% of our contributions comes from the sweat equity of our BIPOC collective. We have had about 38% of our contributions from grants and individual contributions. And let me say it is less than 100K. Okay. So I will be very transparent. We don't have that much money. And this blows my mind, y'all. This is insane. Do you see the amount of research, the amount of data, the amount of analysis, the peer reviewed, right? The way we are showing up, we are intentionally, we publish everything on our website, right? We are transparent with how we work. And this is the response of funders. This is the response of funders. So I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to go deep here. So here's the thing. This work, as Angela and Lena have noted, it has a cost, right? We are all showing up wanting the sector to do better because it continues to harm us every single day. There is a reason I am a consultant and not within an organization. It's not for lack of trying. Trust me, I've submitted many, many job applications, right? But I get to be vocal about, right? I have positionality in my ability to go into an organization, really be honest about where they stand in terms of racial equity and DEI, and then be able to kind of parachute out, right? I can't do that as a person embedded within an organization because we know that people embedded within organizations, specifically Black women and women of color, who talk about issues of racial inequity within their organizations and racial violence, experience a high level of reprisal. Right, so they are either fired or they are denied promotion or they are denied, access to opportunity or they are denied speaking. The list goes on and on and on. The level of violence embedded in this work is enormous, and we are not even talking about the somatic experience. We're not even talking about the psychological experience, right? It is not easy to continue to shoulder the burden of wanting the sector to be better, but there is no other choice. There is no other choice, which is why we are here. And for the funding sector to not see the fact that it is only BIPOC people that can lead this work because we have a lived experience of racial violence and racism. I will be very clear, white people have no racial agility when it comes to talking about racism and the experience of racism. The last time I said that on the webinar, on a webinar, the response I got was, well, we experience hardship too. No. You do not on this level. You have no idea what it is like to be discriminated against because of your skin color. So you have no lived experience of racism and you have no lived racial agility, right? So by not funding a BIPOC-led movement to call for data, which the global development sector loves, again, but doesn't support, is a clear indication of the priorities of the global development sector and actually pushing for anti-racism and racial equity. I will pause there.
Thank you so much, Umo. I'm moved and equally as, or not, maybe not equally, but the agitation is shared. And, it's the statistic that you shared just a while ago is absolutely appalling in terms of the funding. And I know that there are many expletives behind that, which you're more than welcome to vocalize, but I want to delve into that a little bit more because I think funding, when we talk about gender equality, is something that there is a dearth of funding. We talk about that all the time. We've talked about it in some of the earlier Tapestry series, and I want to talk about the dearth of funding when you add race into the mix. And so, all three of you can speak to that, I'm sure. So, Uma, I don't know if you want to start, and then Angela and Lena kind of fill in the gaps as well.
So you're absolutely right, Leanne, that there is a dearth of funding when it comes to gender-focused issues. That is even, even less, right? So less than 1% of funding goes to gender-related issues, but even less than that goes to Black-led gender-related, movements, right, and organizations. What is interesting to me, though, and when I say interesting, there's expletives behind this because it's not interesting. It's just like, it's an observation, is that funders, I hear trust-based philanthropy a lot, still haven't seen it actually in practice. And I also hear, that we are intersectional funders. No, you all are not, because you still are saying that gender issues and racial issues are not tied together. Here's the thing, the impact, the people who are impacted by racial violence in organizations in the global development sector are majority Black women and women of color, right? How is it not a gender related issue, but somehow you want to unpack the two and fund racial issues, racial justice issues over here and gender justice issues? Like, I've gone to funders who have said, well, your initiative, the Racial Equity Index, is not specifically gender focused. Really? Okay, it's really, again, and Angela said this so perfectly in her presentation, this is the system that we live in. This is the system that we are a part of. This is by design. This is intentional, right? Yeah.
Lena or Angela, do you want to add to that?
Yes. Should I go, Lena?
You shall go.
The fact is, what Uma's talking about is this, it's so, when you're experiencing that conversation that separates gender and race, and you ask, so why is it separated? I feel like gender is easy to talk about. We can get behind women. But get behind Black women, not so much. Brown women, oh my God, they come with all their issues. So there's this sort of insidious thing that happens when we talk about Black women, right? And then what has happened is, then we started saying, to not talk about Black women, we started saying BIPOC, right? Because we were trying to be more inclusive, because we realized that anti-Black racism is the one thing that we will not talk about. So we looked at ways of trying to not focus on Black women or on Black people, because that is one piece of this enormous development puzzle that we have been, it has been a difficult conversation to have. To talk about colonization and to talk about decolonization and to talk about white racism, white supremacy culture, all of that makes people freak out in our world. People, you cannot do it. 10 years ago, to sit around and talk about white supremacy culture, I would have definitely lost my job at Oxfam. Even though I was sitting in Haiti watching white supremacy culture unfold in all of its magnificence, okay, watching the international development sector destroy this country with its data and metrics and log frames and all the things that development loves, right? This was happening 10 years ago. But for us to say, there's a kind of racism in the way that the international community was working in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. To say that, I would have definitely lost my job. So why? Well, if we can't say that international development is racist in its conceptualization, in its delivery of services, in its implementation, in its programming, in its communications, what else? In its leadership. If we can't say that, if you can't look at an organization where everybody is at the top of the organization, a bunch of white people in the top of the organization, and you can't say, how is your lived experience allowing you to be able to run this organization? You can't. But that's the way a lot of organizations are run, right? So for me, and I would go to let Lena, fill in the gaps, but the reality is, as a Black woman sitting in these organizations, I realized that to be able to say that, I had to be on my own. I had to leave and be able to come to a forum like this and say, oh, this is what I see, without fear of retribution in that way. Right. So I understand when Uma says, as a consultant, we have a different opportunity. And I would just end by saying, when I try to write about what the issue of race and anti-Black racism in particular, how that impacts how we show up in the development sector, I got a lot of pushback, just so you know. I had people saying to me, Why are you only talking about Black people? Why not gay people? I got that. As though to talk about Black people is to not talk about gay people, and not recognize that you can be Black and gay and still be able to be a part of that intersectional conversation. But this reluctance to talk about Blackness is at the core of what is happening in our sector. We have to say it for us to be able to work in it, to change it. And I think that that's something that we really struggled with, and the racial equity index is suffering from that at some level. Because once you say race, here's how it goes. You say racial, everybody says, oh my God, we're about to talk about Black people. And then the whole conversation just goes. That's my experience. And Lena, I'm gonna let you go.
Well, I mean, yeah, everything that Uma said, everything that Angela said. Just a couple of points that came to mind when you were both speaking was, yeah, feminism and like the portrayal of Black feminists as being divisive and destructive. Where are the white women who are countering that? Where are they? Where are the feminists who are standing up and saying, no, if we're really in this together, are we in this together? I don't really see it. And you can start to see this picture that we're sharing only a tiny part of each of us, of what we've shared, of the struggles and the challenges that we have to even try and get this on a priority list at all. You know, we have the system, we have patriarchy, we have white feminism, we have consistently, and it is completely exhausting. And to the point of funding, for me, there is a threshold, right? So you have funders saying they want to do the right thing, they want to fund this, that, and the other. But when it comes to the talk and then crossing that threshold to give the money, something miraculous happens where it just like, you just can't get through. It's like a brick wall. And I sit with that a lot because this is the system working as it was set up to do. You can have months and months of conversations with funders about funding this work on racial equity, recognizing that this is the important piece that we need to start moving on. And yet the people who sign off will be the ones who say no. The people that you have to convince again and again and again. And then I don't know what you have to do to get it through the door. There aren't enough funders who are matching what they say with their money. But that's true of organizations as well. This is the system. We can see the repetitiveness and how it's perpetuated in different areas. Organizations say they are anti-racist with their black squares. Now, where are those promises? Where are those commitments? Where is the work? We are still here doing the work and grinding and still exhausting ourselves. And just as Uma said, because what choice do we have?
Thank you, Lena. It's a difficult thing because when I think about even some of the conversations that we've had through the Tapestry series around maternal health, for instance, you can't talk about maternal health without talking about the disproportionate risk that Black and brown women are being put at. And so to know that there is a separation being made between those two issues, or between race and gender as it relates to maternal health, or as it relates to funding of those issues, is disheartening, to say the least. And I'm wondering, in the work that all three of you've been doing, it seems like collaboration, you know, Uma, in the slide that you showed, the in-kind kind of sponsorship and partnership that you've been able to pull together. If collaboration is the response to that, like, how do you move past or overcome the issue of funding to then still get through to the goals and the endeavors that you want to see achieved or realized? And is collaboration the answer? I mean, is it part of the answer? I don't know if you can speak to some of the work that you have been able to do through collaborating with other women of color, other Black and brown women, other Black disabled women, other Black, women and brown women of various intersections, and the importance of not just collaboration, but collaboration as a way of overcoming these issues, and the collaboration as a way of representing the broad spectrum of Black and brown women that exists, so the intersectional element of it as well. And I don't know who wants to respond to that. Uma, go ahead.
Yeah. I think, so I'm a practicing somatic abolitionist, and what that means is that, I practice literally weekly with my triad, and, we witness each other and work through how race and racial violence shows up in our bodies. And the reason I bring this up is because we really don't give space at all in this sector or for people to really sit with that. Ta-Nehisi Coates has this really brilliant but heartbreaking quote, that says, racism is a visceral experience, and I'm paraphrasing here, so please look it up. Racism is a visceral experience. It cracks bones, it breaks teeth. And he goes on to say more. There is not enough recognition for the impact that this work has on our emotional well-being on a day-to-day basis. And the other piece of this is that what has happened to us as a group of people, we are not a monolith, but it has happened to us communally. And so the only way we can actually work on these issues is communally, right? We have been forced to, and we have been pitted against each other because of white supremacy, to fight for resources, to feel like we can't collaborate, to feel like, this idea is just mine and I gotta keep it. And I think what's so beautiful about the Racial Equity Index and somatic abolitionist spaces and other collectives I'm able to be a part of is that there is a building of the structure that we want to live in, right? There is a radical building of the structure that we want to live in. There is a understanding of our humanness in the work that we are doing, which is why I said, if maybe we'll release this in Q1, Q2, but if we don't meet that deadline, that's also okay too. We're not meeting some funder's deadline. We are meeting ours. We're going to respect ourselves in this work and show up for each other. I think as well, though, in terms of the Racial Equity Index, one thing that we do recognize is that the discussions on racial equity, even though they are advanced, I mean, racial justice, not at all in the US or anywhere else in the world, even though the discussions and the language happens to be more available in the United States and not necessarily within the EU or the UK or the rest of the world, there's still conversations that need to happen. So we are not at all saying that this index, this version, one that we have is applicable to every single person. This is an evolving thing. And so please do not place the prescriptions of perfection on any of us or on our work, because we understand that this is an evolving learning environment. And I think that's the amazing thing about working alongside Black people and women of color in this work, because we recognize that. So there's a healing that happens alongside the work, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Are you on mute?
Yeah, you're mute.
Sorry, Lena.
Sorry, that was a very poignant thing to say, because I think it's important, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, to balance the personal and the professional, because so much of the work that people of color, Black women, often engage in is work that is meaningful to them in their personal lives and to us in our personal lives. And so there is a weight that is carried when you choose to engage with this kind of work. And it ties into what I think Ananda said, or a question statement that Ananda said, and feel free, Ananda, to come in and speak to this as well, about being prepared to lose, and the weight that you carry, that carries when you are choosing to step out on your own and do this work, because you can't do it within the institutions themselves. And Ananda, I don't know if you want to add to that, and then have the panelists respond.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for the presentations. I'm a fan of Angela's work for a long time already. And I was happy that I saw it earlier this morning, and I really tried to organize my agenda to be here. So I had a very difficult conversation today, so I'm feeling a bit, it's very good to be here and to hear from you, because I think it helped me to move through all the difficulties. But the truth is, I have a position of important leadership in Doctors Without Borders, and as you might know, we are also known as MSF, no Médecins Sans Frontières, and MSF, it's only the, it's quite racist organization. It's not an organization that is, and I'm not saying it because this is not confidential. This is not a surprise. Actually, MSF it's known by being an organization that is not addressing racial inequalities, right? Since always, and the communications, they have been challenged for a long time, and this year was an important year in this regard too. And we had a lot of media denouncing MSF images and so on. So in parallel, I have been working under one of the general directions, which is protecting me a lot and making people to move forward a DEI agenda that they don't really want to. But as I feel protected, I accepted this work. And I think having a strong leadership as allies is what really allows me to keep working in an institution. And I was really relating to what you said, Uma, when you said, I'm a consultant because I can't be in an organization anymore, right? And so that's very important, feeling protected. And about what I said, I have the feeling if I don't keep my mental health in a very high up place, and I do, I'm Brazilian. In Brazil, psychology is something very well spread. We are people that we don't necessarily have a prejudice against mental health, against psychology. So I'm a person that is, I really rely on this to keep moving in this sense. But I have the feeling if I am not here all the time, in terms of my mental health, in terms of feeling totally good as a Black woman, it's impossible to do this work, right? I have to keep my morals very high to be able to do this work. Otherwise, the feeling of losing, it's very common, and that's what I wanted. That's what I meant actually, and maybe we can also. Maybe you could also share a bit more about this, but being prepared to lose is a constant feeling that is extremely frustrating, that we shouldn't be feeling all the time because it's not healthy. So that's why I'm talking about having a mental health in a very high place. Otherwise, it's impossible. And yeah, I don't know if I can say something else, but I don't need to feel strong all the time. It's unhealthy to feel strong all the time. So feeling protected, being protected is fundamental. But even with this structure that I feel that I have today, is still difficult. It is still hard.
Angela, I don't know if you want to speak to that or.
Yeah, I just, first of all, thank you for your comments. Like, you know, these kinds of moments, we often don't have them, right? We don't reflect because the work is hard all the time and we're in a constant state of motion. And the opportunity to stop and just think about how am I feeling is oftentimes, we often don't have it. So first of all, thank you. First of all, I really, really appreciate your comments. I guess I would say, you know, the trope around, there's a trope, right, around Black women, that we are always badass, Black girl magic. I don't subscribe to these things. I know when I saw Black girl magic, Black women have been using this Black girl magic, especially in the US, to say that we can kick ass. And for me, Black girl magic is just one more thing for me to be amazing at. And I just don't want one more thing to be amazing at. I just don't. And so And so Black women, especially in development, are often the ones in the organizations that's talking about communications, that's fighting the bigger structure around comms. They're the ones in the fundraising, like Uma, that's arguing about getting funding. They're the ones in all these different pieces. And this does not exclude other women of color. I'm speaking about Black women because the experience of Black women is unique, especially in international development. So I need us to be clear about that. But the thing is, this trope, this idea that we are superwomen has been also a part of how we live in our personal, going back to what Lena said, how we live in our personal, that then translates into how we live in our professional. And because of that, we are badass every 24/7. And I can say to you, as a Black woman with 3 Black sons, living in the United States, I am literally badass almost none of the time, because I am always living under fear. This is my everyday go-to. So in my personal, I have 3 Black sons who at any given interaction with the police can be murdered. I understand that. It is what I wake up to every day. It is what I go to bed with every night in my personal. And then you take that now and you bring it to the professional. So now I'm coming to work already with that stress. That is my everyday stress. And now how do you perform at a professional level when you're not protected, or when you may be protected, but you know that protection may not last, because there's a moment when you might say some shit that that your protection is gone. So I just want to say to you, thank you for your comment. I love what you said, but understand this, we have to reject this idea of always 24/7 badassness, right? And come into a place where we can take control of our mental health and physical health as well, and then do this work. Because I can say to you, for all the Black women who have come before me, who have done it, who have worked on this, Rosa Parks, all these Black women who have come before me, they also, I recognize that they came, they did their piece, and then they moved on. And I feel the same way. I will not take on the responsibility of changing international development on my back as one woman in this whole thing, right? So I'd say that to you just to say, you are right to prioritize you and to prioritize your mental health. You are correct in that, right? Because this system will eat you up, spit you out, and move on to the next victim. Yeah. So that's all I want to say to you. But I want to thank you for your just being so open, vulnerable. It's like what we have to do to be normal people. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
And I know we're at time, but I think let's just, time is also part of that urgency culture that we don't always need to focus on.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Ananda, for your honesty and feeling like this is a safe enough space to share that information and to share how you're feeling. And I want to thank all 3 of our panelists for, again, just sharing the work that you're doing, but also sharing really important information about how you take care of yourself while doing that work. And, just thinking about Angela's point and Uma's point about making sure to have self-care, I try to think of literally everything that I do as badass now. Like, if I made it through the day, that was me being a badass. If I chose to take a nap and not do something, that was badass too, because prioritizing yourself is literally, especially in this sector and in the work that you're doing, the most important thing. Because to make a cliche, or to use a cliche, nobody can pour from an empty cup. And so I just want to thank everybody for participating in the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing, Uma, Lena, and Angelo. Thank you for everybody in their comments, for listening and having such a enriching and powerful conversation and discussing the things that make all of us uncomfortable, or most of us uncomfortable. And Erica, I don't know if you're ready to share the tapestry that we've developed from this amazing conversation, just so everyone can see what we've come up with. And so this will sit as part of the larger tapestry that we're creating across maternal health, climate change, feminist organizing, feminist funding. Our next event is feminist organizing on, Lauren, the date is December 2nd. So we really hope that we'll be able to see more of you and those of you who came, because I think, as I've said before, racial justice is something that cuts across every single thing that we do in this sector. And so feminist organizing and feminist funding, as we've discussed, is a big part of that. So thanks everyone for joining, and you can look out on the Women in Dev website for the tapestry, and we will be sharing the recording over the next couple of days as well.
Thank you so much. And reach out on LinkedIn, okay, people?
Yes.
Connect on LinkedIn, please.
Post one on that. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Have a great day.